Welcome to Your Digital Reputation. Here's your host, Roger Christie.
Hello, and thanks for joining us. My name's Roger Christie, founder of reputation advisory Propel, and host of the Your Digital Reputation podcast, where we talk to industry leaders about how they get social media right, how they build trust in the moments that matter most. And my guest in the YDR studio today knows more about these sorts of moments than most people, having advised thousands, if not tens of thousands, of leaders on how to turn moments of transformation, even crisis, into moments of positive change. And I'm sure you'll leave today's conversation with a strong sense of the power of purpose and conviction when it comes to visionary leadership. She's someone I've personally followed online for well over a decade now, and it's an absolute thrill to finally be comparing notes on the role digital channels play for leaders looking to earn and leverage trust online at scale. It's a very warm welcome from the other side of the globe to founder and CEO of the Crisis Ready Institute, Melissa Agnes. Thanks for joining me, Melissa.
Thanks for having me, Raj. I loved that intro. I'm so if I was listening to that intro, I'd be like, oh, I want to hear this conversation. So thank you for lining it up that way.
I'm sure there are people listening thinking the same thing. So not to put you on any pressure right at the outset, but I do know, as I said, having followed you for many years now, I know and have seen and have read all the different insights and perspectives you shared on this sort of challenge, but this opportunity for leaders over the years. So I'm really keen, let alone our listeners, to hear what you have to say. And maybe, Melissa, if we can do a little bit of scene setting right up front and help our listeners just learn a bit more about you. You're an author, a TEDx speaker, an industry commentator for the likes of the Wall Street Journal. You're an award-winning entrepreneur and a thought leader. You've taught at universities like Harvard, and you've advised the likes of NATO, ministries of foreign affairs and defense, and a range of Fortune 500 companies. And you share all that experience with clients via the Crisis Ready Institute today. It's quite a list of credentials. So with all that, could you tell us a little bit about what you actually do?
Yeah, thank you for all of that. I've shifted recently. So I think the most common thing you'd think is I'm a consultant, right? And I was for over a decade. But what I really, really, really love to do is to teach the depths of what I know to those who are willing and wanting to learn from it or learn about it to a level of embodiment. So for me, it's, whether it's crisis communication, whether it's transformational, visionary leadership, and how do you really step into your highest potential as a leader in the moments that are the most complicated, complex, and challenging to do so? How do you do so with not just confidence or not just competence, but like this embodied knowing of who you are, what you stand for, and where you are able to take your community, your employees, your stakeholders, your following, whatever kind of platform you might lead on, how you're able to take them to that next level of whatever the something better might be, but something better. Does that make sense?
What I'm hearing straight away and what I'd be keen to explore in this chat, there sounds like an awful lot of purpose, authenticity, yourselfness, if I can kind of make a term there, the idea of bringing your full self into that situation, as you said, those really important moments for leaders, those moments of change and transformation. So with that in mind, I can see almost where this conversation is going to go already, and the value that it's going to bring to people who might find themselves either in that situation already or looking into that in the very near future. With that in mind, I'm keen to almost ask a very open question to start that brings all that together. For leaders today, how important are their digital efforts in that battleground for stakeholder belief and buy-in when they want to take people on that journey, those communities you talked about?
I mean, my first mind goes to, it depends on who you're speaking to and who you're trying to reach, right? If I want, and even at that, it's always important just because the world is, for the most part, on digital. I say for the most part because living in the United States right now, I tend to not be on digital as much as I used to be, just because there's so much noise and it can be distracting, but people are still there. So even if you're leading your local community, you still want to make sure that you have a lot of different touch points with those that you are leading or those that you are trying to reach and communicate with. So even if it's in real life, you're still going to want to have those touch points on digital so that you have more influence. You have more abilities to resonate and to build trust.
Absolutely. And when you talked about, right in your setup there, when you talked about leaders in those critical moments of transformation and change and making sure that they embody what they believe and what they're trying to achieve, when it comes to the audiences and where the audiences are active, the people you're trying to reach and influence, I suppose, it's fair to say that, strategy really only works, whatever it is that that leader is trying to drive their agenda, it only works when stakeholders believe in the direction they're heading, whether that's employees or whether that might be partners, investors, shareholders, whoever that audience is or audiences. It only works when they believe. So in the digital environment, and as you say, where it is filled with noise, where it is filled with random and sometimes misinformation, we really need to ensure that we're harnessing these channels to cut through to the audiences who matter most. And I would argue that it's those leaders who communicate with conviction and consistently who build that trust with audiences to believe in the strategy that they're delivering. How do you see that dynamic where even if we are surrounded by noise online, even if there are lots of extra voices out there and often, shouting random generic platitudes, when that happens, how important is it to use these channels to almost reach through the screen, build that belief in buy-in with stakeholders and have them come on the journey in that digital environment?
It's extremely important. And it's important to remember, I think, most that no matter what platform you're speaking to people from, you're a transmission, right? You are transmitting. And when you talk about conviction, I love that word, especially in the context of if you're leading through crisis or you're leading through change or you're leading through resistance. To me, all of the different, most challenging moments to lead through, it comes with some form of resistance. And we can go deep down that pathway, that rabbit hole if you wanted to, because that's so important. But in order to resonate through resistance and truly be heard and felt and build that trust so that people believe in what you're saying, believe you, and believe you to be the leader to take them there, it's about remembering that we are transmitters, right? And so it's not just the words that you say, it's, to your point, it's how much you believe the words that you say, because if you don't believe them, there's going to be a lack of integrity there that people are going to feel, and they may not consciously be able to articulate why you seem off to them or why there's a part of themselves that just don't trust you. But that's that transmission. That's that felt sense of lack of integrity, therefore lack of trust, whether we consciously acknowledge or realize why we have this lack of trust or not.
So that's fascinating, because I would argue then that one of the great challenges we've been running this podcast for several years. The idea of leaders using digital channels is not a new thing, but I would argue that the vast majority still have that kind of box ticking mentality when it comes to, well, I've said this, for example, in a town hall. I've said this as part of a media release or a press interview, whatever it might be. I'm now going to take a version of that and I'm just going to share it online. And let's just make sure that we tick all boxes and we, tick the LinkedIn box, for example. We got it up there. We got it out to those audiences. But what you're talking about there in terms of that conviction around transmission and the feeling you leave people with, not just the words that are written on the screen or the video if it's delivered that way, is such an important element that gets lost when leaders just tick the box. So how and from your perspective, and maybe even from the examples that you've seen, particularly the ones that have worked well, how do leaders translate or transfer that conviction from transmission offline into conviction in the way that they transmit online as well?
Same thing. It's the same thing, because when we're talking about transmission, we're talking about energetics, right? We know that science tells us that we have an energetic body and we have a physical body. Science tells us that we have three intelligence centers, not just one. We don't just have our brain, but we also have our heart brain and a gut brain. And science tells us that just looking at, for example, the heart brain, the electromagnetic field of the heart expands several feet beyond the body and is a very powerful portal of information both to and from. You receive information because all information is energy and it's around us, right? So that's like a portal for reception. It travels, that energy, that information travels from the vagus nerve straight up to the brain, where then our brain deciphers that and analyzes that and decides what to do with it. Just as when we're communicating outwardly, if we are as a leader, again, in the most critical moments, it's especially important when we are grounded, when we are grounded in who we know we are, what we believe in, and what we are communicating, again, to bring people to that quote unquote better version of what tomorrow could look like, right? That could be in kind of any context. Knowing that your words are, they're they're not the superficial level but of layer of communication, but they're not the most potent. What people feel from you, so if you can be grounded, if you can open up that heart space, whether you're speaking virtually the way that you and I are right now from, opposite ends of the world, or if we were in person, I'm going to argue that you would feel me and my intention and what I'm saying and how I'm articulating it and my body language and all these things the same way virtually as you would in person, because energy has no boundaries. So if you think that showing up online, you're able, to your point, to just check these boxes and let's just, throw anything out and just contribute to the noise that nobody needs, you're going to completely not just miss the mark and the opportunity, but you're missing the point in what communication and what relational communication is in the first place. And if you have a message that you care deeply about, that will serve those who it's designed to serve, then showing up online with that same potency, with that same energy, with that same intention, with that same grounded, heart open, energetic state or mindset, if you will, as you would in a town hall or in a meeting that you're hosting in a boardroom, like that's the piece that you need to constantly be aware of and be willing to show up as.
And I'm guessing if we can go one step further than that, even if you don't do those things that you've just described, you won't and can't earn trust. And so this is where things all fall over, because I appreciate your immediate response to my answer was they are the same. And yet, if we look, the world is filled with examples where leaders are so different. The world is filled with examples where you meet someone in the flesh and you might feel that energy, you might feel that conviction, and then you see it online, you think, who's writing this? Like, where the energy is lost, the belief is lost, the conviction is lost. And so for some reason, when we step into the online environment, which I would argue, and obviously I'm coming at this from a very biased perspective, but I argue that your online efforts are even more important today. Why? Because you and I can be talking now, Melissa. People can be sitting in a room hearing you say these, whatever words they are, and that is important. But online is where that impact scales. Online is where those words and those actions and those behaviors are going to be stress tested, not just in that moment, but against all the things that you've ever said or done, and against the third-party validation that either builds up or erodes what you said, because people say, nah, he doesn't really mean that, or he doesn't really believe that. So the online environment is critical for then building that stakeholder belief in the direction that you're heading. And I love what you're saying there about these things therefore have to match. So if I go and deliver a town hall with enthusiasm, if I go and speak to a room of 1,000 people, I have to carry that across into the online environment and deliver it with the same conviction. Otherwise, the risk is that, one, people don't believe the offline message, or two, we don't reach those stakeholders we need to with the message online or offline. It's really important.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking about two things. I'm thinking about, one, how people just want to go viral on one hand, right? So I'm looking at even the networks of entrepreneurs, fellow entrepreneurs that I'm in groups with, and they're constantly striving for, like, just how do I get my TikTok or my this or my that to go viral? And when they do, it's really comical to me because it's often like, I have a girlfriend who recently wrote, she was like, "Oh, I finally went viral, but it was a TikTok of my daughter dancing." I'm like, but how does that align with the message that you actually want virality around, right? So that's one thought that I'm having, is making sure that you're in it for the right reasons. Or you're like looking at the metrics, not just vanity metrics, but you're looking at the metrics that align with the bigger goal of the mission and the vision. And then two, I'm thinking of fear. It can oftentimes feel so much safer to stand in a room filled with 100 people in a town hall and communicate, maybe because you're used to it, maybe because you feel like you have more of a sense of control because you can leave or you can shut it down or you can do whatever it might be, maybe because you unconsciously or consciously know that you can feel the energy in the room and adapt to it depending on where the conversation might be going. So again, that goes back to a sense of safety and control. Versus when you have something, you open up your heart and you speak a message of conviction and something you firmly believe in, and you put it out there. And now all of a sudden, it's, in a perfect world, you probably wanted it to pick up steam and for it to get more and more and more views. And then what if those views turn negative? Or what if the criticism comes back? Or what if you launch yourself into a controversy that feels very, very, very unsafe and scary to your nervous system? So I think there's those two pieces that need to be a part of the conversation. When I'm feeling into, somebody who might be scared of going online or might be looking at going online and looking at the wrong metrics that don't actually serve the bigger purpose.
I love that you've called both those things out, because the ideas, the concepts of virality and fear, they do, for me, and I, a couple of examples immediately come to mind. I remember working with a leader previously where a post did go viral and way outperformed anything he'd previously done. And what was fascinating about it, as you're describing it, and this is where the fear element comes in, he went from talking to a room of familiar people, in inverted commas, people that he knew, his network and so on, to suddenly having access to, 100,000 new people that he'd never spoken to before or didn't know who he was, didn't know his background, didn't know his context. And so in that case, going viral, even though it wasn't the objective, but going viral there actually introduced fear. Hang on a minute, suddenly these people don't know me. They don't know my backstory. They don't know the things that I'm passionate about. They don't know the real me. And so in a way, again, I know we're talking about this concept, but the idea of going viral can actually be counterintuitive to our goals. And that's often what I counsel people is, if it happens for the right reasons, as you said, if it's elevating and amplifying your positive message that you want to spread out there with the world, fabulous. But if it's not necessarily a good thing. It can actually lead to a whole heap of other problems. And that's when the fear comes in. And what I would argue, the second story that comes to mind here, on this podcast, I had a chat with Dr. Kirsten Ferguson a little while ago, who's written a lot about leadership, both here in Australia and globally. And what she was saying was she remembers some really important moments in her career when she would share things online. And in her eyes, if those things were picked up and shared by others and were broadcast, on billboards and from rooftops and so on, brilliant. And the important thing about that, and tying into what you've just said there, Melissa, is what drove that for her was a clear purpose. So she knew that whatever she did share, whether it was online or offline, if that idea was taken and spread and amplified, it was a win for her. And where does the risk be? Where is the risk avoided or minimized? It's avoided by having a clear purpose. And if I know that when I turn up and talk about these issues that I do firmly believe in them, and I do firmly believe that they will create that better future, as you were saying, anyone can take that message and share it. Even if they're against me, I don't mind, because I stand behind that. I'm convicted by those beliefs, and I want them to be out there, spread into new networks and influencing people the right way.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I think about how much that okay, so I don't like to say things are, I mean, nothing's really black and white. I don't like to say things that are right and wrong. So just for context, my compass of right and wrong, the only thing that I will say is off of my moral compass of like, this is not right, is when it creates in some way, shape, or form more pain and suffering for whomever, right? More pain and suffering is not in alignment with my with what I believe is right. And also what I work towards. I work towards helping leaders understand how to communicate and lead through some of the most challenging moments to create less pain and suffering in the world when it matters most. Like that is my mission, that is my vision, that is like what my compass, that's where I'm going towards. So with that being said, when you are communicating something that you believe in, when you are communicating something or you're trying to share a message, like this example of what was the name that
Kirsten.
you
Yeah,
just
Kirsten
shared?
Ferguson. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Kirsten's message, like having that conviction and knowing that whatever her message is, it is in alignment with her moral compass of the better world that she wants to leave behind or that she's working towards is what I'm gathering. Where I'm going is when you are a change maker, when you are somebody who is blazing trails, and especially for the good of whomever, the good of the world, the good of your company, the good of change, will automatically, for the most part, trigger fear and resistance in people, even if that change is positive. Because the ego, our self identity, are part of our human that makes us individuals, right? Doesn't like anything that is out of what it knows, so out of the norm for itself, because it cannot guarantee that it will be able to keep you alive in that new. The ego cannot discern between something that is dangerous and something that is simply uncomfortable because it's new and unfamiliar. So the second that you are somebody who's up there and you are leading through crisis, let's just say that, because maybe you're not even trying to create this whole movement and like make the world a better place, but you're leading your company through a really challenging moment of uncertainty. Uncertainty is instantly going to trigger fear to the nervous system because it is new, it is uncertain. The ego cannot make sure that it doesn't know 100% that it's going to keep you alive in that newness, which is going to create resistance. And resistance is a really, really powerful force and really challenging to resonate through into. And I am speaking from so much experience here, both in my like professional, like as a consultant and as a teacher, but also as a speaker who's out there trying to make the world a better place with a very new message. I get met with a lot of resistance. And all of this to say, if you don't have that conviction, if you don't have the conviction of knowing that what you are doing is for the greater good of some of the situation or of your people or of the world or whatever your vision, your mission is, and you don't have this grounded sense of stability and safety in your own body towards that, that resistance can destroy you. And I don't mean destroy your reputation or your legacy, that comes down the line, but can destroy your self-confidence, can destroy your health, can destroy your ability to even want to get up and lead anymore, because it can be so powerful and so uncomfortable. So all of that to say that I think that that's another thing to just kind of bring to openness to I think we're all aware of it, but I don't think it's talked about often. I think in today's world of visibility and leadership in such turbulent and uncertain times of such drastic change happening all around the world in so many different ways, shapes, and forms, that resistance is one of the biggest challenges that leaders face today, leaders who are leading through any type of change. And so having just kind of bringing back that conviction and having that very strong groundedness and sense of self and vision and belief in your vision of that better world that you're creating, like we have to be so anchored in that in order even just to not let that resistance drive us down, which means impact the change that we're here to make.
And so if I take that and then look at the way that things are playing out around that idea of resistance, I think we're hitting on a really valuable insight here for people listening. When you take the traditional approach to digital communications and you look at it through the lens of, I have a message. So let's just say, for argument's sake, we do have that clear purpose, we do have that strategy, and we do want to communicate it online. What I want to be really clear on is conviction isn't about delivering a message with impact and job done. That's not what conviction means. Conviction for me is about commitment to the cause, whether I'm leading that conversation, whether I'm listening to that conversation, or whether I'm contributing to that conversation. And I would argue it goes beyond communications too in terms of relationship building. It's also about creating or identifying and connecting with allies around that particular cause that I'm convicted of. And so I don't want people to walk away from this thinking that, okay, so the solution to what Melissa's saying here and to address this resistance is simply to talk more or to talk with more passion. That's not the answer. Conviction comes from, I would argue, consistency. So if we kind of step back on that formula, if we have a clear purpose, here's what I believe, here's what that better future looks like, as you were describing it earlier. And that then translates into a strategic plan, a direction. This is what we're going to do in order to achieve that particular outcome. And we are convicted of that, and we take that online and offline. The thing that people will measure us by, and the thing that will either drive belief in our direction or cut it off at the knees, is consistency. And so consistency doesn't mean spamming people 2 times a day on your given platform or platforms of choice. That's not consistency. That's noise, as you said earlier. Consistency is being associated with and surrounding yourself with the issues and the people that are relating to that issues on a regular basis, so that when this particular topic comes up, people know, oh, I can rely on Melissa to be there and have an opinion on that. When something comes up that is in your wheelhouse that relates to the issues that you talk about, you should be there and you should have a voice. You should be building other people up. You should be asking questions. You should be connecting people. That's what consistency looks like. So if I can again take us right back to the start of this point, that consistency is key. And the consistency isn't about talking more. It's not about posting more. It's about everything that you do in an online environment that is searchable and scalable. Everything that you do should reflect that clear purpose. And that's what conviction looks like. And this is where I think so many people have got it wrong today, because they focus too much on the message and trying to make the message clever. Let me tell you, the moments of conviction come when these little signals and little moments, when people often aren't watching or only one person is watching. That's what conviction looks like, because you don't have the stage. You're actually still in the wings, but you're having the same conversation because it matters an awful lot to you.
And I'll add to that, because I think it's important, is being, I'm going to say humble and courageous enough to listen and to adapt for or in the interest of that message having impact. So in another way of saying that is, don't get so tied down to, this is the way that I say this, and this is this is what I believe, and this is the only way because this is my way in some way, shape, or form. But being able to listen, especially if you are articulating and communicating something, anything to do with change, right? You're going to create that resistance, you're going to create that fear. And so often we have to say things in different ways in order for them to resonate in different ways and with different people is one thing. But also, we might think that our message, the way that we're articulating it, makes so much sense. And yet it's missing the mark and therefore not creating the impact that is the vision and is the mission and drives the change and drives the positive results and all the things. So being able to listen, and when I say being humble enough and courageous enough to go, oh, maybe I need to hear and refocus, like go back to the drawing table. The conviction remains the same. The mission remains the same. The drive for this type of impact that creates the world in a better way, as an example, remains the same. But the way you deliver the message can be adapted based on the feedback and the results that you're having with that form of message. And that's really, really important.
Spot on. Because communication isn't just about talking. It starts from listening. It starts from understanding,
Yes.
and that then improves and informs the message that goes back. If you're not connected to and understanding the real-time views of your stakeholders today, you are way behind. And so when we talk about that idea of delivering strategy and then reaching the outcomes that you're after, if you don't have that connection online, if you're not plugged into your key stakeholders' views and attitudes, good luck. Essentially, good luck. And the other thing I'd say too, Melissa, when we talk about that idea of consistency and that cycle of listening, learning, responding, contributing, all that sort of, and then posting, that sort of dynamic, I think one of the other traps that people fall into is feeling like they need to do the work behind the scenes and then communicate the big reveal. do the work behind the scenes and communicate the big reveal. And as you're rightly pointing out there is that feedback loop that happens, valuable feedback loop that happens along the journey. The very best leaders that I've seen who have driven change and transformation, both online and offline, take you on the journey. They almost, this concept of working out loud, they share the notes as they're going. They share the progress updates, even the things that don't work. So from an organizational perspective, if your leaders are only turning up to share the big announcement and then there is crickets in between that and their next major announcement, it will not build belief and trust. It actually only reinforces skepticism because people are going to wonder why. Why are you only sharing the good news? Why are you only sharing the big announcements? Why aren't you taking us on the journey? So again, we can talk about conviction. We can talk about posting with, big bang and grandeur and all that sort of stuff. It means absolutely nothing if we're not there regularly, consistently turning up and sharing our views with the people who matter most.
I'm grateful for this because as you're saying all of that you just said, I'm thinking, man, I need to do that better. I need to do that more. I need to do that better. And it's true. And I feel like there's some people, don't get me wrong, there's some people who are phenomenal at that and who are so natural to pick up the phone and to just do a live stream or to pick up the phone and to create a story or whatever it might be. And then there's a lot of us who aren't natural at it. And again, it goes back to it can feel scary, or it can also feel like, why wouldn't anybody care, right? Like, why nobody cares what I'm doing behind the scenes. But to your point, it really, really matters for so many deep-seated reasons. It really, really matters. And I think we can all probably, I won't say all, most of us can probably step that up a little bit and do that a little bit better. It's about connection. Everything is about connection. When I teach crisis communication, when I teach transformational leadership, like it is about connection with self, connection with source or whomever, whatever that might look like for you, for like divine guidance, and connection with those that you are seeking to lead through some form of transformation.
So can you tell us more about that in the context, again, of looking at this through the prism or the lens of digital channels and digital engagement? What does that look like? Because that connection, I agree with you, is so important. And it's obviously not something that comes, and research will tell us this, from broadcasting again and again, from turning up to deliver a message and then disappear. Obviously, that doesn't drive connection. What does for leaders in those moments of transformation?
The hardest thing and the hardest thing for leaders in those moments of transformation and the fastest way is vulnerability. Vulnerability is the gateway, the fastest gateway to connection, because vulnerability makes you real. It makes you authentic. It makes you relatable, and therefore it makes you trustworthy. And I'm not saying if there's a big moment of uncertainty and even you as the leader, you have fear, right? And that's so common, more common than anybody ever admits to. I'm not saying to stand up and start crying and quivering and shaking and, we're all going to die type of thing, type of messaging. There's a difference between being emotional and being emotive. There is nothing wrong with standing up and saying, this is scary to me also. I've never been through this either. And here's what we're doing, and here's why we're doing it, and here's that bigger vision of where we're going, and here's how we're going to get there together, because guess what? We're stronger together. And that small admittance of truth, which is vulnerable, and vulnerability, it's so fascinating because when I teach this, I teach that you look up vulnerability in the dictionary, and it essentially, vulnerability equates to unsafe. It equates to risk. It equates to having some element of being unsafe, right? Vulnerability, when we're talking about it in the context that we're talking about it right now, vulnerability is only unsafe because the thoughts around it tell your ego, tell you that you're going to be judged, or you're not going to be liked, or you're going to appear as weak. But those thoughts aren't facts. Those facts, I think one of the things, if you were to ask me, like, what's something I wish somebody told me as a kid, that we can't believe everything that we think. We really cannot always trust our thoughts, and mostly we can't trust our thoughts. Vulnerability is being able to stand up and share deeper truths about you as a human being in a context, in a way that says, hey, I might be standing up here on the podium, but you are not alone, because we're in this together and we're feeling this together because we're human in a really challenging situation together. And here's what we're doing, and here's why, and here's where we're going, and we're going to get there together, right? So it's that combination of this dance between providing reassurance, providing hope, and having the courage to open up your heart and be real in ways that our generations have not taught us as leaders how to stand up and do, which is why it feels unsafe. So the last thing that I'll say about this, at least until I let you talk, so it's not such a monologue, is you can only be as vulnerable as your nervous system feels safe to be. And vulnerability is the fastest, deepest, biggest gateway to connection. Connection is the goal. Vulnerability is like going to the gym. It's a muscle. You get to, in our courses, in our programs, we teach leaders how to step into true vulnerability for the greater purpose of what they're doing, to create that greater connection in the moments that matter most. And in the 2-week span of this particular lesson, the homework is to do something in alignment with your mission and vision every other day that takes you more deeply outside of your comfort zone towards that greater mission and vision. So it's not just something random, right? You're not going streaking down the street. That's not what we're talking about. And the reason that it's designed every 48 hours is because you do the thing that feels so scary. And then you give yourself 48 hours for your system, your nervous system, to recalibrate and to go, oh, I didn't die. In fact, I left feeling stronger. I left feeling more connected. I left feeling more successful in my mission. And then you do it again, just like going to the gym. You do your sets, you do your reps, you have your rest days. Your rest days are so important for the muscles to rebuild stronger. So vulnerability is something that takes great courage. It is one of the pathways to that connection, the biggest, deepest, most connected pathways to that connection, and takes conscious practice as a muscle, as a leadership muscle to strengthen and to build.
So what you just explained there and kind of articulated in this theory and practice way is almost the exact formula, if you will, that one of our previous guests on this show, Dr. Angelina Acharya, shared very recently on the podcast in her own leadership journey. And I remember her saying she walked into this room and told people that, like them, she doesn't have all the answers and she's looking to learn from the smartest people in the room, which is all of them that are sitting around listening to her as the leader, the new leader. And she was saying how people came up to her afterwards and were just almost flabbergasted that someone would share so honestly and so vulnerably as you're saying. And it does create that connection because, as you said, this is not an us and them scenario. It's not me in my ivory tower and you out on the shop floor. We're all in this together and we're going on that journey. And I think it's a really powerful model to share, Melissa, because it does bring this conversation full circle, and it shows us that it is not about standing up and delivering those compelling visionary messages in isolation that will deliver real change. It is about being in amongst the people, having that connection, having that trust. But what we're hearing is that it's also hard. It is time consuming. Let's just be frank. It is time consuming to build those connections and maintain those connections. It is scary, as you said, to turn up and be vulnerable and to share those deeper truths, as you're saying. These things are all tricky. So why would you do them? You do them because this online environment presents such capacity to scale. It presents such capacity for that asynchronous engagement. Deliver a message at one time or an idea or a thought at one time to be received by someone at a time that it suits them. It allows you to access hard to reach places across the globe that you physically would find impossible. So why would you bother doing this? We do it because it is the most effective way to drive change today when done well. And so with that in mind and these ideas of connection and conviction and purpose that we've talked about today, if I put my corporate hat on, I'm sitting here and looking at it from a leadership and a governance and maybe even a board perspective. And I'm going, so if my leaders today aren't harnessing this environment and unharnessing these opportunities in the way that you're describing, are we at risk? Is that too much of a stretch here to say that those leaders who are just turning up and delivering generic platitudes, those leaders who are just turning up to broadcast and not listen and understand their stakeholders in return, those leaders who essentially fail to buid the connection and the connection with audiences that is required to drive belief in their strategy, are those organizations at greater risk today than those who are doing it well?
Absolutely. And are those people truly leaders? There's a lot of individuals. I'm thinking that everybody is a leader. Everybody has the capacity. Everybody has the opportunity every day to be a leader. Most leaders have not been taught how to lead effectively, especially when it matters most, just by the nature of the way that our cultures have taught us, right? And so everything that we're talking about in this is a lot of it when to put into practice is actually a little nerve-wracking. It's vulnerable. And I think it takes that conscious awareness of that self-reflection to say, we're just contributing to the noise. Is that who we are? Is that who we want to be? To your point, does that present more risk? It absolutely does. Um, and if that is who you are and who you want to be, by all means, continue being the best, highest version of yourself. And if that's what that is, then no judgment there. But if your honest answer is no, I want to do more, I want to be more, I want to contribute more, and I want to make more impactful change, then in this conversation, I don't know how long we've been speaking now, 40 minutes ish. There's so many different lessons in this conversation that you could choose one thing and say, you know what, I'm just going to reflect on this one thing, and I'm going to self-reflect on this one thing. And I'm going to ask myself challenging questions around this one thing. For example, let's take vulnerability. How vulnerable am I currently able to be? Why is that? What in my system feels unsafe? Maybe it's the voice in my head that's my father, maybe whatever it is, right? Just kind of getting curious about it and then having that discernment and saying, okay, well, what's the best next version of myself in terms of my leadership and my leadership capacity and capability and my seek for connection in my greater vision and mission? And so therefore, could I increase just keeping on vulnerability, could I increase my capacity to be a little bit more vulnerable and therefore relatable and trustworthy and connective by 5 degrees? And what might that look like over the next 3 months? To actually take it and go, it's not just a concept or a theory, but going back to how I kind of introduced myself of how can I learn to embody this skill? Not just understand it from a cognitive standpoint, but to actually teach my body how to be it when I need to most or when it matters the most for your own leadership, your own legacy.
Because that's where the daily behaviors are going to come from when you do embody and you do believe it. I love that. And for me, getting through a lot of those fear barriers, breaking through a lot of those time constraints, those uncertainties, it does come from stepping back, assessing that purpose, building that conviction in what it is you're trying to achieve, and then breaking through those fears. That's what's going to drive you. That's what's going to give you that fuel to be able to do so. And Melissa, I'm so pleased that you finished on that real practical note, because I'm hoping people will have listened today, taken in the advice and the experiences that you've shared, and can hear how it is just about making that conscious decision, as you said, 5 degrees or 5% or whatever it might be, just trying to do things more in line with the mark you want to leave on the world. So if there are people listening today who have questions, and if there are people who have heard what you said, they're subscribing to it, they're saying, yes, I firmly believe in this idea of embodiment and what you've talked about, Melissa, what is the best way for them to reach out and continue that conversation with you?
Oh, please reach out if you're interested, even just to have the conversation, because it's such an important one. Crisisreadyinstitute.com. All the programs are there, but also M Agnes at crisisreadyinstitute.com. You'll get me directly. LinkedIn DM me, IG DM me. Like I'm in it. I'm in it for the conversation, and everything that we're saying is like, here we said a lot, here's how you can break it down and maybe incrementally adapt and embody some of the things if they appeal to you. And also, it's not easy. None of this is easy. Building our capacity, building our skill set, really stepping into the next, like, highest version of ourselves for the right reasons in alignment with whatever it is you're here to do is not easy. And so therefore, I know that firsthand. I know that very, very well firsthand. And so being a support system for those who are willing to step into that and to do the not easy work for the greater good, that is what I am here for. So
it's not easy, but it's meaningful. And I think that's the important point
oh,
here.
it matters. It's not easy, but it is worth it every time. Every time.
And I've got no doubt that whether people are watching or listening today, they will have sensed that conviction from you through your conversation today. So, Melissa, thank you so much for being a part of the Your Digital Reputation podcast.
Thanks again for listening. If you've learned something from today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others. For all show notes, head to propelgroup.com.au. Thanks again for listening.